Any questions, any feedback? No, I think silence will be pretty small. Can I get a motion to approve this? All right, got first and second. Michelle, thank you. All in favor of approving the draft minutes for the previous meeting? Say aye. Any approval? The abstention? All right. All right, next item is we're going to start with a report from the chair. There's a couple of things I want to share. We want to have Commissioner Rosado provide thoughts.
Well, thank you for coming to Westchester. Hopefully this is a little convenient for some. Look at this here. And again, we're still looking to identify a New York City spot. I think we're getting close to that. As you know, the governor's office is moving. There. I'm having a hard time believing that we're in October. I don't know if this happens at a certain age, but this year, particularly this year, has flown by. I will say that as I've been around the state in the last few months, we are DCJS a little bit of a victory lap over the crime rates, especially shootings. We're at not just pre-pandemic levels, but we're at historic lows. And this is good, right, for all the obvious reasons. But also for me, it provides us with some space. When I say it, I laugh at myself because you really don't have the time, right, Emily? But it does provide us with a moment to kind of look beyond the horizon and say, okay, how can we be proactive? What can we do? What can we spend money on that is more preventive than just dealing with the crisis that we've been in for the last 3 years? Remember, we had the pandemic and the shootings were high, and we had transition in government, and then we were like, let's get these down. And so two things we're battling with, actually three. One is across the board, trying to help all of our folks in law enforcement with recruitment, with a change in mentality about recruitment. As I know that this is a hard thing. Two is we're trying to use this space that maybe exists in my mind only, this moment to take advantage that is not the crisis, but to really change narratives, right? How we talk about crime rates, but also how we represent what we've actually done for the last few years. It's not just depend on and fund law enforcement, but bring in the community groups and insist, right, that they have a seat at the table. And in the space of youth and youth justice, I think it's important to also, take the victory lap, but also to recognize that we are still in crisis, right, with youth in general. I'll say New York to not say national. And what does that mean for those of us who are close? So we had our Council on Community Justice meeting last week, and I'll say, what I said then is this. People in this room know a lot more than most people, right, about youth justice, youth crisis, right, and youth psychology, let's say that. And so when we hear about a 14-year-old, right, who shoots up his school and kills 4 people, including 2 kids, right? The day that happened, the press, as a former media person, I can criticize the press. The press was like, he'll be tried as an adult, he'll be tried as an adult. And it was so annoying to me because I don't even know what that means. So we know what it means legally, but what does it mean? At the end of the day, I say, if we try him as a potato, he's still a 14. And so those of us who know more, not me, I should say, those of you who know more about the population that we are A, concerned about, B, want to help, it's time for us to kind of sound, a different alarm and say, well, our youth are in crisis and these are the solutions. And when we look at a 14-year-old, like medicine, mental health, right, medical professionals will say that 14-year-old can be saved. That's that part of the law that says we're putting him away for life. I don't know how many of you, look at that and say, well, this is also an opportunity for us to educate the rest of the world, right? And what we know. And that's just one example, not to get, real political. I'm not ready to get on the stage and have that fight, but I want to use the opportunity, not of the shooting, but of the moment, to really bring to bear in a more purposeful way, what we know about you and what we know about saving them. And again, I depend on all of you. You're the experts. I'm ready to take the stage, with the right talking points, but I think this is the moment, and I want you to tell us at the CJS and all the other agencies what you need from us to do that, right? What is the campaign? What are the talking points? And what can we take to the governor as we look at the state efforts and stuff? I still think there's a chance for us to weigh in, right, and to school others on what the crisis is and what the solution is. There's not one thing that will solve everything, but at least we can give people the vocabulary with which to talk about talk about the crisis, and third, really talk about the solution. Can we go around and give people smart things to say at a dinner party, right? That will take us to changing that mentality. And for many adults, they just don't want to see them until they're 18. And if we understand that they're in crisis, we should do that. I'll stop there and thank you all for being here. And I think that in that way, as we look at the next year, the JDEC has a big role, in my view, in how we deal with conversation.
So much. I think that's particularly changing the narrative of how this, happened with our youth, but people were conversation. Presentation will help actually have that conversation now. Next item we wanted to go through, we're gonna spend some time sort of talking more about the bringing up that are very much tied to sort of our funding work, tied to really bringing back how is our funding direction going to be able to address some of these issues, and to also for us to be very adamant about pushing this. Also, the presentations that we're going to have today are going to give further light in terms of understanding that helps. The other item that I wanted to report back around is the executive committee composition. I want to first thank everyone that we put out the call and for asking the volunteers. We got a lot of volunteers, and we went through in terms of determining the composition we need to have for the committee, the executive committee. And so where we are in terms of the committee is we have Commissioner Van Harris, Freddie Cox, Precious Corral, Judge Richardson, Commissioner Rosado, and Jason Phillips be part of that. It provides a representation across all of the expertise that need to sit on the executive committee. And it's just as a reminder, the executive committee will serve as the group that provides guidance on grants and as well as other matters that relate to Jack, in particular, the stimulation. So again, thank you all for volunteering. And it's just the act of volunteering, you're asking to basically say, yes, I will take on one more meeting, really appreciate you all for taking this on. And for those who also volunteered, willing to take one. So now, also because you're not on the executive committee, does not necessarily mean that you don't have an opportunity to weigh in, right? As you all know, these meetings, we are very much intentional around everyone needs to weigh in terms of their expertise, but you all are here because of your lens that you actually bring to this. So, but I will definitely sort of lean on the executive committee to make sure that we are doing our part work. All right, so let's get to the next item, which is unfinished business. We're going to start with our federal funding status updates. Anya and
I do. Just keep it on the tolls.
Yeah.
I'm coming here filling in for Mara Davies today from the Office of Program Development Funding. I'm here with Jillian, me and Jim. So we got the federal award summary in your packet. Since the last meeting, we applied for the 2020 photo federal grant. That is not received one candidate. We're waiting to hear back. Usually they respond with the grant by its grant. We received 8 out of 10 of the other awards, so the public is a little busy, so we anticipate hearing those soon. The 2020 awards, there were 2 of them that were supposed to end 9/30/24. Those were extended. We received a 1-year extension for both of them, so they'll now end 9/30/25, so that's great news. Mini grants are on the agenda. You'll see on here that the mini grants we have listed it for 750, it was originally 500. You're just trying to extend on a little bit more of that funding, so maybe instead of doing 10 grants, maybe 15, and I won't steal just as thunder on that. It's just on the chart, we can revert it if necessary, we're totally fine. The amounts at the bottom, you see the RED and the compliance monitoring, those are a little bit higher than usual. I believe typically we were showing the annual amounts, but we actually moved it out to the 2026 just to show how much spending will happen in the future on those. We can go back to the 1-year commitment if that's preferred, no problem. The compliance monitoring by the State Commission of Corrections, that's showing about 2 years, so it lessens the balances up at the top. So we can show that we're actually spending the money down. There are 2 RFPs being drafted. Thank you, OIK. That's for the transformative youth hubs and the youth advisory committees. We hope to get those out maybe by the end of the year, depending how everything goes. I think that's everything for now.
Can I ask what is the price for funding for the 2020?
Okay, so the 2020 award, usually we received 1 year, but it was divided into 2. Because we were not in compliance, they withheld 5% of the award, then we became in compliance and they awarded us the rest of the 5%. So instead of 1 nice award, it's 2.
Okay.
And that's what that 5% is.
And did I remember correctly, last time we said that the 2018, 2019 was at the prior, I still see it here, and that it's extended to next year?
It went really fast.
Because I remember talking that we had to give money back to the government if we didn't spend it. But in this sheet, it shows that.
I believe a few months ago, we must have received an extension. They're both showing they end 9/30/25. We received 2 extensions for that. We received a 1-year extension, then we had to ask for another extension, so we did receive 2. Not likely to get an extension after that, though.
Right.
So that's the final.
That's very clear.
We did turn back for meeting 17, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Congrats to the team.
The questions regarding the funding, thank you, Michelle.
A lot of money to spend.
Excited to see these RFPs are in development, so I think that's a chunk of money, so
Yeah.
get out the door. Question. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Gillian. All right.
And maybe you're killing sports.
I thought you'd like it. All right, so next item we're going to move to is funding proposals and updates. I'll start with the mini grants request.
Computer,
The
IPS.
I didn't know it's just like that. So it does this every time it's done.
When I get the full screen of that. So perfect that.
She's a fix it her computer.
Yeah,
Very good.
it is very dramatic. I have witnesses when I go to IPS and be like, I'm gonna do it.
And then the YouTube link.
Does anybody have an extended cord to format?
Not the tiger.
think that's the depth of her.
So, you know, Tony, you can steal thunder anytime. So yes, what you have before you is, you know,
Somebody speaking up and took it away.
thank you.
Someone take it.
It was out the door. It's still. So as a reminder, at the last DEG meeting, you know, you all had an aligned in accordance with your strategic plan approved, up to 10 grant, for around about $50,000 a piece, up to $2,000 a piece. And as we were planning for getting that request out the door and for folks to respond to that, we were having internal conversations about the fact that, you know, what do we look like if we, you know, inevitably we know something happens and we're gonna be understaffed somewhere, in some capacity on the projects we will, approve during specific timeframes. We have the lapse dates, so how do we make sure we're staying on the lapse dates to ensure that we're spending all of the allocation? And what happens if we get a lot of really good proposals in that fit the criteria and the desire of the JAGs and the programming? Could we fund more if we get more? And so in light of that, we propose coming back to you all to ask, to be able to fund up to 15 of those awards, which would bring the total dollar amount, additional $250,000 to the total dollar amount available to $750,000. The bid request is live. I can tell you that, the bids are due back October 16th. I can tell you there's been at least 100 unique organizations who have started filling out the bid request based upon the software that we are using to get the bid request in the door this year. So again, those are partials, they're not submitted. So, you know, and some of them are duplicate organizations figuring that out, but they're only eligible for one, or each organization is only eligible for up to one. So that's kind of the request is, you know, as Tanya said, you know, on the spending plan, $750,000, so $500,000 is where you want to grant us the ability to fund more than 10 if we get some really great. Great proposal, thank you. Nothing else changes other than, from your.
So for the additional 250, these are the set of dollars, we want to make sure that we're spending down.
Yeah.
Any questions?
But I already talked to Dave, I didn't get the RFP. I think that it would be great if all of us can get it, so we can share it with our board.
Yeah, absolutely. That is interesting. We'll make sure it goes out for that. I don't, we kind of do one for both there, but I don't know, it's so our policy is there, we'll make sure that everybody can. And that will share.
Question,
Emily?
no, you,
Tanya?
no,
Me?
in your moment. Are the members of the JJAG included in the blackout period once the RFP is out?
This is not technically an RFP, right? So it's the same thing. I'm gonna guess it doesn't apply. I'm gonna defer to Killian, actually.
Yeah, I should have asked earlier, I didn't know his name.
They are discretionary awards, but best practice would still be to do nothing other than to tell people where the application is available, and mostly you just don't want to be giving any entity fees, at least some sort of like leg up, just to ensure fairness. So I guess it depends on what you want to say. It's not that you can't say anything, it's more, it's making sure that it's fair for every entity involved.
Yeah, sharing that information.
Yes.
So those of us who work for the state, we're there, once the RFP for the settlement is issued, there's a period until the.
Well, usually what would happen is if this was a formal RFP or RFA, we would have a question and answers portion of it where, like, let's say anyone who wants to apply would send a question to a designated mailbox or person. And when we answer those questions, we would answer every single one of them and make the questions and answers available to everyone, so that everyone has the exact same information available to them when they're applying. Same reason, just to make sure that everyone's getting the same opportunity, same information, and in the interest of fairness.
But we're precluded from discussing it. Because again, if you give somebody a leg up, and people always ask us for a briefing, I'm like, I can give you a briefing, but then you can't apply for a lender.
Right.
So that's what we figured for terms of like, so you can't talk about it for a period of time until people's applications are.
So we are working on a scoring instrument, just because we anticipate getting some new some new responses with that, and we're working with the, um,
I just have a question about the reporting back on these mini grants. Like, what's they're just. What, because we're not going through the regular process, I just.
You mean
Well,
in terms-
like, what are we requiring them to report back?
well, they will still have to do like quarterly reporting.
Oh, okay.
All the
So
reporting.
still has the same.
Correct, they still have all the reporting, the
Okay.
same reporting requirements. And their grantees would,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And as we've done in the past, we're always open, and most grantees are open to come presenting at the JAG on their programs and the projects that they've done. I think 15 on the agenda might be interesting and difficult, but we would definitely, make whatever.
So, remind me again, what's the timeframe that we're looking at? I know that 16th is the deadline. When's the ballparking in terms of like hoping to, announce?
So Killian and Tanya are pretty, yeah. Close to
Close to yours.
November 1st.
I was just, yeah,
Yeah, well, it is that tight because we're using the money that goes down on, September 5th. And we want to give the grantees as much time as possible. With what they discussed. That's not a correct, so. Okay, yeah.
we applaud the admission,
Yeah.
but we understand the prioritization in terms of, spending down the dollars, but also in terms of, our anticipation, our excitement of just really getting these mini grants out the door. To get folks really starting to move around this area, so, I'm excited but nervous, particularly around the potential 100 you said that. So hopefully that trickles much down.
That's 100% likely what's gonna happen here. I think that 100, they're not, I was actually trying to pull up the latest unique number for you when my computer did whatever it just did. So, but, some of those are people going in more than once and like not finishing an application, so, it's not gonna count as an application unless it's final. So really that final number, but really big kudos and support to the whole team, OIJ and PDF, because, we set a pretty ambitious timeline, kind of aggressive timeline, and we were able to get it out the door only like 2 weeks behind our initial timeline, which was really good, based on the speed of which, we were hoping to get this out. So, 15, all beautiful credit.
Other questions?
Really excited to see sort of where these land. I'm just wondering if there's any intersection with the grants and these, the YJI, particularly the Y backs, right? Like, thinking about them. I know outcomes for $50,000 is a ridiculous cost. We got some sort of or technical assistance support.
I don't know if I'm the best person, just because the timelines, I think, I don't know how they're really gonna actually line up in terms of like, being established and then moving for pretty quickly. But I think, there's always, we're looking at existing grantees that are existing organizations with this funding because of the program also, so to be eligible for this funding, you have to be an organization that is already registered to do business with New York State,
who is already, sort of have the ability to do some of that stuff, or some of our other organizations, or, in some of our other programs, we're looking at smaller grassroots organizations who do need a lot of that capacity building support. But I think, in terms of what the overall, these three priorities, around increasing employee engagement and the trauma, we're gonna get a variety of programs, and I think there's always opportunity for us to figure out how we look at specific within these measures and how that works. Amen, Jesus.
Am I being invited to weigh in? I think. So I think the timeline is different, right? But that should not preclude in the long term, as these mini grants potentially continue, to be a source of support, meaning the data center be a source of support for everyone. And in fact, I think it would make the data effects center stronger to learn what the difficulties are with the smaller grassroots, right? For me, the dream for the White Bags is really make it be a hub of knowledge to preserve the ability to sustain itself as an organization. And a piece of that is learning how to put a logic model together, learning how to articulate the theory of action, and all of the pieces that come with that we define outputs and then outputs, right? So in my world, these things should collaborate and be bigger and multiply. That's my
I just want to give a applause for Anne who's back in the office listening. She did was able to log in and look at the 163 partial applications.
Well, that's a good sign.
Mhm.
To the spin here.
Maybe we'll be back in December.
Because, I think in some ways it may tell a story of, how many organizations are existing out there that are very much interested in weighing in and doing their work.
Yeah.
That they may not need this round, right, where they may be come back to the table for a second. So this is a good thing, that there is potentially that many organizations that are doing this type of work around New York State that we actually can help support even in a small way. Thank you.
Well, it might be helpful if there's a short list created, like in the event, when the decisions are made, that could come back to us and could be easily approved, in December, maybe. If there's really,
In terms of,
well,
There's more than
if
15.
there's more than 15 that are, and the decision is difficult, and there's some that are really, you have to make hard decisions with that many applications, to create a short list that could just come back for.
We also can look at that because these are discretionary contracts, depending on what the grantees ask for, there may or may not be available other funding sources, like even funding that's not technically within the purview of the JJAG. So we could take a look at what types of things they're asking for, because depending on what the project itself is, that's what feasibly drives whether an appropriation that we have elsewhere in the budget is available for it. So we could try and take a look at that and come back and discuss.
question. I'm looking at you, Tristan, because between you and Shelley, I think there are the experts in the room about this. When we had the Policy Equity Academy, there was $50,000 attached, right? Very different group of people receiving the funding, very different goals for the Policy Equity Academy, but so everybody is reminded in the room, this was to build in more equity at the adjustment point of the youth justice system patient. $50,000 sounds like a lot of money, but may not be a lot of money. And if I remember correctly, one of the lessons in the PDA was, what can this money be used for, what can it not be used for? So are there lessons from that experience that can, be put together for the mini grants and made available to everyone? Like you cannot buy a car with state money, I don't know if that's the rule. Or, you know, you cannot go to Las Vegas. So what are the rules that will help people think more critically about what they can do with 50,000?
So we did put some ideas and funding, parameters in the bid sort of group back outlining what people could potentially, use for the money, use the money for. I think where we did run into, Tori, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think where we ran into most of the challenges was spending $50,000 when it was going to students and local government. The nonprofits didn't struggle as much, and we have limited the solicitation to nonprofit organizations. So hopefully that will also with some of the challenges we did experience, with the $50,000 that was available under
That's helpful, yeah, because knowing what you can and cannot spend on and what you can mix and
Yeah.
match, right? That's important.
I think we were careful to focus on the nonprofits, like Trista said, because of the issues we have with local government and the fact that once you award money, it has to go through their local legislature to be approved. And so for many of them, they were taking months to get this request in front of their local legislature, which means that they couldn't start their programming, which means they would have to turn back some of that funding. We don't have to go through that with nonprofits, because many of them can just receive it as long as the board approves it. So I think that was the biggest distinction. And the biggest thing that we learned from PEA, especially when we're talking about such a small amount of money.
Other questions? Feedback? Can I get a motion to approve? First and second. All in favor, please raise your hand. Abstentions? Down. Okay. So approve the increase from 10 to 15. Thank you, Trista, for sharing that update. We're super excited. We cannot wait to see what that looks like.
And again, my apologies for my back.
I don't know, just about, the amount of money that we have, you know, great, but it's a small amount for what we have to spend, so, just curious what and it sounds like the executive committee is now gonna take on what the grants working group was doing, so that, you know, there'll be an intentional look forward to some larger, you know, really significant larger grants that we can make.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's, and I was just sitting there thinking just the idea that there's 163 potential, what are the ways in which, and we're talking about, 50K is, small amounts of money, and it could only go so far. So, and the idea of potentially considering that later, is it worthwhile to begin expanding that 50K to a little bit more? I think that becomes a debt committee conversation, but it has to come back to that.
Or even if some of these small grants have the potential to become much more significant grants. I mean, you're seeing a trend in certain types of nonprofits that are applying, like the way we did, like the Boys and Girls, but like there's ways to do something much more significant that is based on the knowledge, like you have this sort of test case.
Yeah.
And to see what types of organizations are applying, which ones are really having great outcomes, with small amounts of money, and maybe have the capacity to do some more significant work towards our, our strategic plan goals.
Yeah, I think with the larger projects we've already had approved, those are gonna set the stage for, structure for some of that stuff. So, that was the facts of planning. We're moving along and getting those things rolling as well.
It's a great point. There seems to be very much nonprofit system out there that wants support to do this work, so.
Yeah, and like this was the first step in trying to spend out the money because we knew the other bigger projects were gonna take a little bit longer to get off the ground. And wouldn't spend as quickly just because of all the work that needs to go into thoughtfully creating those, that this was the way for you all to start investing in some programs and more direct service type work while the other things were in process and moving, so that we could reduce that potential.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a starvation to, these organizations are in distress, you know? I just, from the funder perspective, to see amazing organizations that we have supported for years just suddenly having to close their doors. I've had about 5 organizations in the last year that just gone into a fiscal crisis and had to close because, you know, even though the wonderful crime stats that you're hearing, people still think crime is rising. I mean, it's just incredible. And so there's this retraction in private funding. And so our money is more important than ever. And so you see with the volume of people applying for $50,000, but those organizations probably have, you know, million plus multi-million-dollar budgets forever, and they're applying for these little grants because there just isn't the money out there. So the idea that we would ever turn money back, you know, and this is a great pipeline for us to be able to see what's going on out there, but, and maybe just ask a couple of questions, pointed questions to the organizations that we choose to fund as a focus group to say, like, what is fundraising like for you? How how can the JJAG like augment what the retraction kind of funding does out there?
And the staff did a great job about having an application that wasn't super comprehensive, right? Because that's what happens as well. You get this long application and you're like, $50,000 to work filling out this application. So, clearly they did a good job of making the application really easy, very simple. We did it now, we're fill it out so that, we can do the application. So one, we can turn it around quickly, and then two, we can get the money out the door quickly as well. So they really did a good job of really thinking that through how we get this. And this money going down to 2025, right? So, we're going to get it to you so you can spend it. And so that we're able to see what results, and hopefully, we get to a year or two, around 2 of this money coming back so that we can keep, these relationships. Because like they always talk about in the beginning, that's sustainability, right? Like we don't want to create this cliff, give them money for a year, they do a great job and say, oh, sorry, we don't have this more money. So really give us a chance to see who's doing what, and to be able to kind of filter that out of, where the organizations that we really find out who's doing great work.
Is there the potential to make some of these multi-year, like, are they only 1-year awards forever, or could we, like, this is after a first year, could you then consider a 2 or 3 year commitment?
We can
Like,
not,
we've done that in the past,
but we have to do a bid for that. We would have to do a full RFP because the dollar would exceed the discretionary threshold.
Okay.
One of the places that might make me wonder around, not only what do we learn, but what can we learn from the others who also applied in terms of just learning where they are to just, in some ways, get ourselves, it could be good information for us to understand where are the nonprofits out there, what are they looking to do, what are they doing and see how it may fit within the goals to, in some ways, kind of setting them up or for us to kind of understand what's out there. So we can make those types of around, dollars and the parts of the state that have these set of nonprofits, because that's the other dynamic I'm interested in wondering about these free, regionally, what is it representing?
We have to, I'm, again, just in my cursory look at the list of works, we've seen some from Western New York, Cattaraugus, Chappaqua, all over the state, really New York City, and then from Buffalo to New York City and anywhere in between north as well. So there is a lot of diversity in those who at least partially looks satisfying, we'll see what happens and what comes in with final.
It's great.
And then I'd also highlight the effort in terms of equity that the tag is not only racial and ethnic equity, but also on geographical equity as well.
I think it would also really interesting to see, but the people who are awarded such a small number of organizations, right? How many of them are intersecting with their local communities, right? And do they talk to probation? Do they talk to DSS? Do they talk to their, are they, are they, I'm just curious sort of how those, whether they're in the awareness of the formal justice system, right? And what impact that has for them. There are pockets where there are really great collaboratives at the local level, county level, and then a lot of also sort of disintegrated. Looks to be meeting all the time and bringing people together. I think the New York City's meetings are happening. The way they used to. I don't know if you guys.
I mean, I think at this point, I don't think I could really definitively really answer sort of that question, but I am taking note of it to be like, well, and like I said, once we get the final applications in, and then, you know, those are questions we can ask, planner just talking about sort of what quarterly reporting programmatically,
Yeah.
that we can require, and we've been having a lot of success in Altamar, which is the program that we have access to at TCJS. Has been really helpful for us on some of our other projects, and also, what's it called? Called Altamar. Yeah, it's a web-based, tool, so you don't even have a login, it's like really accessible to lots of other people. And of course, TCJS is out there, because she helped us get it up and running, and the team really becomes expert in it, but then we can also connect that to the reporting that they have to do contractually with OPF. So, you know, I think there's ways that we can incorporate some of those things in potentially, you know, quarterly reporting that they would be required to do with.
I think the other thing too is, you know, it's gonna be interesting once the hubs RFP goes out. Because that's really gonna connect well into all of this too. We're gonna see where some of those strong collaborators are. Potentially some of those million grants are gonna be located locations that we decided. Start looking at that registration. No. That's okay. Yeah. Larry?
Yes. Yeah.
First, we're gonna stay on Trista, just for the other.
Oh, that's right. So just so the grants have been approved, the expansion of it, we're going to run to the second item. The, Trista, you're going to talk about the writing update around the funding for new members and elevating equity and.
Sure, yeah. So we have been working on a draft of the RFP for the youth action committees or however we name that, how we're calling that. Again, open to renaming the. Beginning. So we have drafted some initial programmatic language around what that RFP ask will look like. You have a kickoff meeting that PDF has set up to work through with all the departments to this RFP. It's a lot more layers than a bid request does. So we're working on getting that developed. And once we go through that kickoff meeting process, as Kelly said, we'll do like a Q&A period, or the bidders, I think it's called bidders conference, right?
Bidders conference usually after, right?
Oh, okay. I don't know what they call it, but we're gonna do a question and answer period, and then we'll make all that information, you know, available. So that is still in process. Our goal is to, I think, as Tanya indicated, to try and make that live by the end of the year. So for that, and that one will be a multi-year grant at some time, because, you know, the RFP dollar amount, that will be multi-year. The Healing and Equity Conference, we have had, preliminary conversations about a date in May of 2020. I believe, we have, we're working around schedules and what that will look like. We have been in conversations, with conference app. We used the conference app last time through the partnership with the Youth Justice Institute. And we'll be likely using that app again, contracting with them to use that app again, because it's a huge success. We've been talking to folks, we've been having preliminary conversations with the developers of that app. And we, the whole thing, we are establishing a planning committee, that will be starting. We have a timeline soon, so that invite will come out, and we'll get that. Right, so that is up and moving. We don't need, there's not a real, we have talked about the event planner. We have a stronger admin team. We've been able to build up. The agency is supportive, the unit is building us the admin supporting team, and we've been talking with OPS and sort of what their event planner supported them with and what that's gonna look like. So we're still in conversations about that. We just had a preliminary meeting to set up an entire timeline for what that will look like to kind of work backwards for us. And there will be a call for proposals to go out again, so to present at the conference again. So we'll make sure that everybody gets that and is very interested in presenting. You have used Alchemer if you submitted to present at the last conference, you have used Alchemer, because that was that we used to present. I need to get proposals for it. And then, you know, we're talking about, is there a sub-theme, what does that kind of look like? The planning committee will be starting very soon. We just set up that timeline a few weeks ago.
Thank you. I have any questions around these updates that Tristan did here? Can you give us updates on what that's and the house?
Yes, so for the Life Hack Center, we are in the process of developing and are close to finalizing an MOU with YJI. That's just working its way through the process. Should get up and running on that, hopefully.
Don't say it. It might change it.
Hopefully
She's not that powerful.
There you
So,
go.
I don't know. People say
You're
it.
absolutely
It's
right.
not like that.
Yeah. It's been working its way back and forth between the university and CJS, and so I think it's ready to sort of be reviewed internally at CJS and work its way through the process, get percentage about it, and then hopefully get that up and running. I think it entails hiring a coordinator for the center, so once that MOU is signed, I think that's the first step in the process. We'll roll it out from there, get the structure set up and running, and, you know, hopefully established enough, at a timely, the hubs come online, which we're anticipating for July of 2025. The Wi-Fi center will be up and ready to go, because there will be a link there to provide assistance to those hubs and drive the work forward. So anything you want to add to that, Gina?
I think with respect to the white packs, until the MOU is signed, we cannot obviously advertise any positions or anything like that. But the YJI has taken steps to draft the position, have that internally vetted, so we can hit the ground running once the signatures are passed. To the MOU, this is the season to hire researchers. So if the stars align, we hope to get somebody really good with knowledge of New York State, more broadly, and type of work that this will demand. a special kind of coordinator, right? And it also supports 2 graduate students, I think, this funding, which to me is the JJAG just investing in the future of youth justice and research, and we should, boast about that too.
Great, yeah, thank you on that. And then on the hubs, we are in the process of sort of developing parameters. We just want to talk to all of you about some questions that have come up as we've been kind of researching that further and putting our thoughts on that. But I'm going to defer on that until after the presentation is going to set the stage for that conversation. So if you don't mind, we will have a real into that conversation on the parameters after the presentation.
So with that said, we're gonna move into the emphasis, which is our presentations. And one of the things that we had agreed on last meeting was giving ourselves an opportunity to continue sort of feeding ourselves and expanding sort of our knowledge base around what are we understanding are the different dynamics that we see in New York around justice work. And I did volunteer to do different presentations throughout our DAG meetings, and Heather has so kindly agreed to do this time for us on which that we have, that we really need to put, need to be part of the center of our conversations, helping understand what's happening, what are the different dynamics around these justice work. So there's going to share information around Native American justice. With that.
Well, there's an exercise that I do in like my other trainings and usually about getting down things. But I just want you guys to think as we're setting up, what have you thought about, or what did you learn in high school or grammar school about Native Americans? Think about that. Yeah.
Not good stuff.
Anybody have an answer?
Was it called that?
I know Michelle said nothing, she didn't learn anything.
Nothing good.
Nothing good, right? Well, explain that, or expand that. What did you learn?
A lot of stereotypes, a lot of, it's a very colonial view. Or romance.
Where we have the Trail of Tears.
Yeah.
Where we have the Indian removal. Like those are the, like how the Pilgrims came over and, they dined with us and then they took our land, right? Like those are all the things. So really, like when the groups that I'm usually presenting in front of, right, we're servicing families, and it's like these are things you might not know influencers when you're dealing with families or children, right? So, the stereotypes, all Indians are drunk. I don't know if you guys knew, but the US government actually produced liquor, alcohol, rum, brandy for Native Americans. And it was like part of their rations. We weren't even allowed to leave the reservation until the 50s. Like we had to get permission to get off the territories. So I have tons of little bit of information like that, but this one is in particular, this presentation is really focusing on something that I am not an expert in. I am an expert in the Indian Child Welfare Act. There are areas that I'm not in health or education, but what I do know is I do know my communities, right? And I do know the peoples and families we're servicing, and I know their history, and I know what we're missing, right? I know we're talking about research. I just enrolled in Grit in my PhD program, and trying to figure out, really trying to figure out what my research question is going to be, and we don't have any in this area, at least for New York State. So I'm thinking I might be leaning for something like this. So I am Heather Maldonado. I am the director of the Office of Native American Services within OCMS. I am a mother of 3. I have a 23-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 1-year-old, and I have a new title soon. I'll be a grandma. I will be a me. I am a member of the Onondaga Nation Beaver Clan. That's the nation that sits in central New York. But I am enrolled because of colonialism and patriotism. I am enrolled in a new credit Ojibwe reservation. So historically, traditionally, I practiced the longhouse, the Haudenosaunee ceremonies. So, we'll start there. So, Native American Services. I know you guys are like, oh, what is Heather doing here? We really don't focus on this population. JJAG has to have a tribal member on its board, which is great because I get to learn from all of you. But Native American Services for New York State actually was established out of the 1880 Whipple Report, and it was because New York State said we have an Indian problem and we need to figure out what to do with them. This was after they put us on territories or reservations. We use territory now, not reservations. In New York State, our tribal nations are actually still on their territories. So if you go out west, the terminology might be a little different for each state that you're visiting. So 1924, right, 100 years ago, this office was established. And the person in my position was pretty much went out to the different reservations and said, hey, like, we're gonna give you groceries, we're gonna give you clothing, and at the same time, we're gonna send your kids to this Thomas Indian school. I'm not gonna go into that, that's a whole other lesson on the Indian residential boarding schools. With that note, we just had Orange Heart Day on September 30th. I hope you guys wore your orange shirt. And to honor and commemorate all of those that attended boarding schools, those that didn't come home. My grandmother was a survivor of the boarding school. And she stayed there till she was 16. And then she came out with a domestic maid, and then started her family. So some of the responsibilities, right, I am the liaison, so if CFS comes to me, OTA comes to me, and they're like, hey, Heather, we have some issues or we have some matters that need to be addressed with Native American populations that travel nations to New York, and I'm that person. Unless it's, DOH, you would go to the American Indian Health Program, and then for SED, you would reach out to Clarissa Jacobs-Rohrbeck. But other than that, those are the 3 state mandated Native American services that we have here in New York. There was a treaty, the Canandaigua Treaty of 1794, very old treaty that New York State promised that they would provide education, social services, and health services to the Native Americans. We are still obligated to uphold all the treaties that we've made with the nations here in New York. So yes, we process checks and payments that those go through my office and then they go right out to the nations. Every nation is different in how they accept their annuities. Some do per capita, some do just a lump sum. We have one nation where we are cutting 500 checks for 500 dollars. I do help with people obtaining tribal identity, which means I might have adoptees that say, hey, I was born near the Seneca Nation Reservation. Can you help me find my family? And I have done that. Anybody do an ancestry DNA? Because I haven't. And it says I'm 61% Native American, which is really weird because all 4 of my grandparents are Native American. But we actually found a cousin who was adopted out in Utah. She reached out to us and says, hey, Heather, it looks like we are first cousins. She's actually first cousins with my father. My great aunt had adopted her out. Nobody knew. And this poor woman did not even know that she was Native American growing up. So it wasn't until she was like in her 50s that she was like, hey, I'm a Cayuga. I didn't know that. And now she's enrolled with the nation. Her children are enrolled with the nation, and they, get a little bit of benefits. Not a ton, but I guess when people are adopted out, right, you really go back and try and find your identity and where you come from, who your people are, right? So this is where all of the nations are in New York. I cover the entire state from Buffalo. Does anybody know? Like, did anybody know where all the nations are? I know you guys have this idea, like, oh, it's over there, it's up here, it's up around the corner, right? So I know in Albany, you guys, or those that are in Albany or down in New York City, you guys are exposed to a lot of it. In Western New York, we have 3 tribal nations. They have the casinos, so always advertisements about the casinos. We have the Green, which is the Tuscarora Indian Nation. They are a traditional nation, which means they do not have an elected form of government. They follow the hereditary chief system. And they are one of the nations that do not accept state or federal office. We have the Seneca Nation of India, which is in the blue and the purple and the orange. So they're actually one nation and they have 3 different territories. And then we have the Tonawanda Indian Band of Senecas, which is another traditional form of government. Again, they don't accept state or federal dollars. They're located on the border of Genesee and Erie County. In the middle, we have Kennedy Nation, which is a community. Right now, their lands have been approved to be placed into federal trust, which means eventually they will become a territory, a federally recognized territory. They do have a federal representative, but they do not have what we call like a hereditary system in place as of yet. The Onondaga Nation, for those of you located in central New York, sits outside in Onondaga, right just outside of Syracuse. My family originally from before 1800s, that's where we came from, and then they migrated up to Canada. The Oneida Indian Nation in Madison County, that is a checkerboard, we call that a checkerboard territory because they buy up pieces of land as they become available. Eventually, their hope is it will all be cohesive. St. Regis, Mohawk, they're the most famous in all services because they're very progressive in their thinking and have a ton of resources. They have a casino, they have an elected form of government. They sit on 2 counties, 2 countries, 2 provinces. So anything that happens down there, whether it's criminal, it's a jurisdictional nightmare. And then down on Long Island, which is my favorite place to visit, we have the Ungacheg Nation in Mastic, New York. They are not federally recognized, so they did not receive federal funds. So when Superstorm Sandy came through, New York State had to step up and actually provide generators and cleaning money funding for them to just get back to the community back to normal. Shinnecock Indian Nation is in the Hamptons, right in the Hamptons. Their bay overlooks Calvin Klein's mansion. It's really, if you want to talk about income inequality and you're looking for a research paper, I'm not doing this one. It's right there. In the 2010 census, right, the Shinnecock income was about 20,000, maybe a little 14,000 for those on the territory. And then, they're sending their kids, because there's no elementary school in the territory, they send them to the Southampton schools. And they're amongst millionaires and millionaires that are going to school. They have vowed that they will not develop their land, so it's all naturesque, right? It's very, I really, take a trip out there. It's lovely. I love being out there. They have the largest powwow this side of the Mississippi every year. It runs Labor Day weekend. If you're out there for that weekend, go visit it. I know we do have a small powwow on Governor's Island sometimes. Sometimes there's socials. I've never been to Governor's Island in New York. But I cover all of the states, all of the counties on the Indian child welfare, anything child welfare, anything that's not related to DOH or SD. Yeah.
So why in Massachusetts people are they federally recognized?
For me?
Why is it federally recognized, in recognition that?
So they have chosen not to seek out federal recognition, which is like a 300-page application. You have to prove to the federal government that you've been there for X amount of years. You have to prove that you have a governance system. You have to prove that you have like laws and customs, and so they just like, we're not going to do, we have a state status, that's what we're going to do. Actually, it was probably during the Federal Termination Act of the 50s where the federal government said, I really don't recognize you as a nation, and they took that federal status away. They did that with the Shinnecocks as well, but the Shinnecocks actually fought for it back, and they received it back on October 1st, 2010.
Oh. So Heather, I have a question. So in Western New York, they are recognized, but they choose not to accept the funding?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So they went through the whole application process and.
No, so it was during the 19th, so all the tribal nations that were established like in the late 1800s, they all had federal recognition. The federal government in the 1950s realized like, hey, like we could do a land grab, we could take land from the tribal nations if we take away their federal status. So they did that to about 110 tribes across the country. And because in some of the nations, they do allotments. Those allotments are managed by the Department of the Interior. So the Department says, if this tribal nation isn't federally recognized, then we're not going to oversee these allotments, and we're able to sell them off to non-natives. So that means, right, like these are sovereign nations, right? Native Americans don't get mortgages on territories. So you have to build as you go. So if you're wealthy, you can build. If you're not, right, you're struggling, you can either rent from somebody or you can buy a mobile home. And that's why we see a lot of income disparity just among the territories itself. Like we have very wealthy merchants, and then we have some people that struggle.
That might be move up renovation to build their homes.
Well, I mean, so that's another good point. There are people that stay on the territory, and then there are people that move away. My family is one of those people that move away. So it's only about 30% of the nation's population that actually live on territories. 70% live off. So they either live in the surrounding areas around the territory, or they just move, right? New York City is supposed to be the large urban Indian population right now. They come from all over the country. I mean, my grandmother left the territory because for a job, for employment, right? There aren't any jobs. If you think about how they treated Native, like they forced us to reservations, right? There was no job, right? They were like, here you go, here's some land. You know, we really had to figure out how stores, groceries, gas, cars, like how are we gonna bring that? How are we gonna bring economics to our territory? If you think about it, 1800s, in the early 1800s, we were still like in that barter trade system. So it's only been a few 200 years, whereas the Europeans had this system already in place. And when I think about it, I was like, wow, that's really crazy. So, and then also in the 50s, at the same time they were doing the land grab, the federal government came in and said, why don't you guys move to the cities, right? In the cities, we're gonna have education, training, and housing for you guys. And guess what happened when the families got there? None of that was available to them, or they had to go jump through hoops to get there. And then they were so ashamed, they didn't want to move back. And about that time, you know, so there's just so many different things, variables that are going on within each community and families as to why they move off territory. There's for me, like I can never move back because the price of land is so high, like nobody can afford it. So it would cost me $20,000 just for an acre to move back, and I need an acre and a half to build on. And then I have to buy all of my supplies and do all of my own contracting, so that's what families face when they move off territory or living in territory.
How do you call that a checkerboard territory?
Because the nation itself are buying up parcels of land that aren't next to each other. So it's like just like might be a piece here, might be a piece here, might be a piece here. If the nation buys it and it comes off the tax rolls and becomes sovereign land.
I'm from that area. I worked with the United Nations before I'm sheriff. But it's my understanding they're buying land that was their land at one time to try to put it all together.
Remember, I don't know, like talked down on New York State, but New York State went in and really took land, and like that really wasn't theirs. Like, oh, we're gonna set up Salamanca here, right? Salamanca is right on the Allegheny territory, and they agreed to lease. The Sac Nation agreed to lease Salamanca to the settlers for 99 years. But now, so people overturn, right? People forget that, and then people are all, Sac Nation like, wait a minute, this is still our land. And so there's been that contest too that's been going over that power struggle in Cattaraugus. So there are 574 tribal nations within the United States. The majority of them are in Alaska. Alaska hosts over 250 of them. And then we have, according to my math, and the census data is really hard because Native Americans, we have been taught this, even through my family, that you don't do the census. Like, you don't participate in the census. This is not your form of government, because I follow the Haudenosaunee, right? This is your government. This is what you're supposed to do. Why are you, following their way? So it's really hard to say if this is an accurate number. I know the census people in 2020 came to my office and they're like, how do we get on the territory? I'm like, I can't help you there, guys. Like, you really have to have a relationship with the tribal nations to get on, to even, like, they don't even share their census information with me. So, so just in New York City, meeting those that are more progressive, I actually did participate in the 2020 census because I was like, if if Native Americans need numbers, I want to be able to represent, so I put down my family and I participated. Going against everything my grandmother taught me. So we're looking at an estimated 86,000 living in New York. Could be more, could be less, it depends. I've also noticed that those that are Indian American, I have checked the box wrong. I actually have a physician and I said, oh, I'm American Indian. He said, oh, I am too. And I said, no, you're Indian American. He's like, huh. I said, you come in somewhere place out and we live here. And I was like, I'm Native American. And so we had that long discussion. He's like, oh, so I've been filling forms out wrong. I was like, maybe, I don't know. So I think we really need to like educate on how to fill out forms, what American Indian means, Native American, Indigenous American.
You said 86,000 in New York or New York City?
Living in New York within the 5 years. And that's the thing, like, we don't see like child welfare cases we're not seeing, and I don't know if it's because they're being identified. But it also, what I did learn, is that if they're multiracial, right? So my oldest son, who's half Puerto Rican and half Native American, that they, once he clicks Hispanic, that's all they see. They don't see the Native American. And so I was like, well, and I told him, like, don't ever put that down because you want to be identified as American Indian, right? So how are we collecting that data? How are we sifting through it? When I search for data within our system, I'm always asking, show me everything, show me all the children that have American Indian in their multiracial selection, because I need to weed through those, right? If the family could very well, you know, look like Eddie or look like Tom and be Native American or from a tribal nation.
Well, even on, like, unless we've changed things on police reports over the last 8 years, like on police reports, it's white, black, or Hispanic, like, we're going to try to capture them.
What reason not even out there?
You know, that's it, that's all we're trying to capture on.
I guess more on it. And this was just, again, a breakdown of the population of here in New York, right? This is from the 2020 census, we got 20 million people. We have 149,000 across the state that identify as American Indian alone. And then 153 that identify as American Indian or in combination with another race. There were more that had 3 or 4. But if you really drill down to the numbers, 1.5%, I think is the number 149 into 20 million is like 1.5% of the New York State population. We also have to remember that the Native American population is very young as well, right? We are losing our elders every day. And we're, my family, my cousins, right, are just populating the territories. I have cousins that have anywhere from 6 to 10 kids at this point, right? I'm not gonna go into these slides because again, I am not an expert on all of them. I just wanted you to be aware of the income inequalities that Native Americans face. Just imagine them living on the territories, right, and the limited availability of jobs, just programming, because some of them are so rural, they didn't have access to that. Let's see. Just, you know, about 1 in 8 American Indian teens were not in school or working in 2021, right? This is all national data. This doesn't speak for New York State, but I'm sure it is happening, right? Education inequalities, right? This is something that, I was sitting on a parent committee and for my Buffalo public school system, and it was just, there are programs that help Native American children succeed, but I don't know if it's coming from the families or the services reports that need to be, I don't know. But we definitely aren't graduating as much as like 1 in 4 are not graduating. I've seen this in our Buffalo public school system. I don't know if that's happening on the territories as much. Again, that would be a closer question. But she, in our conversation, she said that they're not actually going to college. She's seen a huge decline in, young adults going to college. Last year, she said before pandemic, she was servicing about 600 students and now it's half that, 300 students. And she said, I think it's because, now that, cannabis is legal in New York State, like on the territories, right, there's no regulations around it. So everybody is putting up shops and that's where the kids are going, that's where they're working. That's one theory that she has. And then we have the mental health inequities right across the board, where we have high suicide rates. And again, if you think of economic, education, poverty, tribal life, like this is not new to any of us. Did you guys ever watch Reservation Dogs on Hulu?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much what life is on the territories.
What about education, do any other territories have their own schools?
3 of them.
You don't have to look at it.
I think most of them have their own elementary school, aside for on the Shinnecock. There's no high schools. They all have to go off territory for high school. But when you think about that, they're going from a 10 child classroom, and there's a huge high school setting, which they, may not have. Some districts are more welcoming, more inclusive. I don't know if you guys heard in the news, this was a few years ago, where the state was responsible for the upkeep of the schools on the nations, and have been doing a very terrible job about that. So we actually had to advocate for more funding. We just, like, even the schools on the territory are just at a disadvantage. They don't have the technology that high schools or off-reservation schools have. So there's a lot that we need to do to support tribal nations. And again, I'm just one person, I'm one small unit within New York. But that's always been my job, is just to advocate for more services, more funding, more support, more resources.
How big is your staff?
How big is my staff? I have 2 grade 18s, and I have 1 grade 13 as my administrative. So I have a staff of 2 that help me with my statewide work. And I do oversee a community house, and I have about 6 staff there, but they only maintain the community house. They don't do anything outside of the programs. So my office does touch on, we do DV, we do, we're on childcare now, and I've been sitting on here for juvenile justice. So we're slowly expanding, we're part of the fatherhood initiative too. So there's a lot of work for just a team of 3 at this point. But we're getting there, and now I have staff, I can actually focus on the bigger picture, because before it was just me doing all of this by myself with the grade 13. And again, this is all national data, right, where youth are, 3.7 times more likely to be detained than any other demographic, right? And that brings me to, like, for New York, right? Like, I know we're not seeing, and I don't know why. Is it because we're not filtering the data like we should? Is it, like, are we doing that great of a job, right? So that we're not seeing tribal youth in care or in custody or under supervision. This is from OJDP website, and if you click on New York, it says we have 0 kids in custody, which is, I would love that number. I just don't know how much I trust that number, right? And again,
Do you think it's because they're either underreporting or just not seeking out services?
I want to say underreporting.
Yeah.
Well, in child welfare, as a judge, we're required to ask, if the family is Native American, if the family has the right in. It's leaders, right? But in juvenile justice, we don't. We're not required, and we have jurisdiction solely. So my expectation is we're not tracking those numbers at all in juvenile justice.
So this is gonna be my plea and my soapbox, like, we need to change the system, we need to know where these tribal youth are, where are they going? I have done a mini survey, I wanna say it's like a very informal survey on conversations in passing with the tribal nations that I've been working with, very closely, and I've asked about what their prevention services look like for their youth on territory. If they don't have it, it's something we need, something, I'm pretty sure Cattaraugus County, Chautauqua County, they have, I know, because people have said to me, like, my child is under supervision, my child is under supervision, I know there are cases there, I just don't know how they're being identified.
I did some work years ago in another life when I was in media with, the folks at Turning Stone from Ida.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own data. You know, they have their own data that they collect about their own, I think that would be what a place to start. They have their own data on youth and programs, but I'm sure they don't share it. And I think in those places where, that you mentioned per se, unless they self-identify, you know, law enforcement is like the ground. Or,
Well, I mean, and it's not, it's little, I mean, it's really not, I'm not making an excuse for it. It's not, it's a training issue, it's also like, it's not even a big word.
yeah.
It's like, I don't know. It's really fun.
You know, in the last few years, we've added,
And I know I've been that.
we've added gender stuff, we've added all these things, but we still don't have.
It's funny you said that, Brittany, because I applied for a job when I was younger, wanted to be a police officer. And the application was white, black, Hispanic, and I crossed each one of them all off, and I put Native American, and I asked her, I said, she's like, because it's some lawsuit, because there's only 3 identifiers we can have. It's like, well, that's unfair to me, because I'm Native American. But yes, I see that, and I know OCFS, we have been working just on forms, I know we did the foster care form, to be more inclusive of tribal affiliation, because we want to make sure, in the next couple slides, one of the last slides, I'll talk about it, to be more inclusive. So this is DCJS's graph, and her and I talked about it before we started. So it's the blue, right? The blue on the top is where other races, and this races includes Asian, Pacific, and American Indian. I know our numbers are very, very slim, but I think it's really important to remember that Native Americans is not just a race thing, it's also a political status, right? Because New York State has a due diligence to provide services to the American Indian youth, just because of our treaties that we have, right, and the agreements that we have with them. But this isn't, when I looked at this, I'm like, this doesn't tell me anything about what I'm looking for. You know, if I'm just a member of the community and I'm trying to figure out, like, hey, I'm gonna start this grassroots effort about Native Americans, like, this isn't gonna do me well for my application. So, you know, positions filed in family court is 17%, and if that's inclusive of Asian, Pacific, and American Indian, we don't know what percentage of that is either or. We don't know if there's other races included in that 17%. Even still, even if there were 5% that were American Indian petitions that were filed in family court, that's still a disparity. Because again, we're only 1.5% of the state population. So this is just something to talk about, something like, you know, that my unit is looking at, and like how we can be more inclusive, more involved, more at the table. How do we identify these? Because I would love, in a perfect world, I would love to see, you know, all the services being provided to tribal youth, whether they live on territory or off territory. And this is actually a picture of my son when he was 7, in the Longhouse. But OJJZP actually did a cultural prevention webinar series, and it really focused on American Indians, and I thought it was one thought-provoking. It's like, wow, like, why don't we, in New York City, why don't our nations do this, right? And I think they do on some level. I think we just has a program called Under the Husk, right? Which I would love to see replicated in the other nations across the state. What they do is they actually take youth from 12 to 18, and they bring them and they teach them cultural teaching, ceremonies, lessons, right? So they, for 4 years, these children have committed, and what they do is like they might take them out for fasting, they teach them basket weaving, they teach them black moccasin making, they teach them the ceremonies. And from my own personal experience, like I never reconnected with my culture until I was in my 30s, right? I was I was that youth that lived in the city and didn't really know where I belonged. I hung out with Puerto Ricans, I hung out with the Yemenis because that's what I looked like, that's what I felt comfortable with. But I was always figuring out, like, at some point, I was like, okay, this really isn't for me, and I really couldn't figure out where I was going or where I belonged. Until my grandmother passed away, and a cousin of mine had just said, hey, like, just make sure you keep coming back to my house, and that's what he did. And so you now make it a point to make sure that my children understand their culture and where they come from. So, culture as prevention, I think we need to do more of that in New York State, and not just for Native Americans. It could be, African American, like, where do they want to learn, right, about their family's history. So just something that we can, build off of. I will be bringing, like some of you said, yes, I am bringing cultural safety training from, the Seven Dances Coalition, in the beginning of November. And hopefully, it's gonna be like an advertisement for other state agencies to say, hey, like, we want you to bring this cultural training to our staff, so we know how to totally work with the indigenous population.
Do you talk with other states that have large Native American populations and the things that they're doing to?
It's so hard because they have such a larger population, like, oh yes, that would be great, and then you bring it here, and it's like, it really doesn't fit, and it's like, oh, the nation's not interested, and it's really hard to bring, like, programs from other states or other tribal members from out of state, because it's like, then they get upset, because like, we have our own experts here, why are you asking other people to come and teach us? So,
So I'm employed by Oklahoma University, so they are doing a lot in Oklahoma to push for, making this stuff more an awareness and bringing it to, their communities and, counting things in, the information amongst the families and things like that, and trying to provide more equitable services. So I hear a lot about it just because they have a large Native American population. I just wondered if it ever translates over.
sometimes not.
Yeah.
We can get great ideas from them, and try and do some work around it here. We have a couple nonprofits here in New York State. We have the American Indian Community House in New York City, right? But their funding has dwindled. I don't know what their capacity is. Like, we're really trying to work with them to get it up, to increase their funding and their services. And then we have Native American Community Services in Western New York, and they're actually slowly gaining traction across the state. So they're actually in, I think, Rochester now. And I think the goal is to go across the state. But they provide a lot of child welfare services. They do cultural training, cultural competency training, just cultural events for families.
And I've worked with them on a case, and they're so involved, and they know these families really well. And I found it very, very helpful to work with them.
Any other questions? I mean, this is just touching the service, and I think the Latin American.
No, it's
So much better. Population that is, regardless of size, is significant, that they are a population. And I really appreciate that somebody, this is giving us a level, just a piece of the ice cream, just understanding sort of what you need to know about. And so sitting here, I started as a social teacher, so what I ended up teaching was around the civil wars, and it's just like I had to really change how I approached it, because the curriculum only has a very colonial to colonizer. So here just stretches sort of how that, right, that orientation, and I was invited to the educational advice. We're still doing that. Boy, now. Our university is
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you. It's still morning, so I can still say good morning. I'm Emily DeTilio. I am the research director at the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Research, Office of Justice Research and Performance. And I've been with the JAG a few times now, so it's great to be back. I'm happy that I keep on being invited back to the group. I am typically invited to come and speak to the JAG about justice system data that we have at DCJS. And we're certainly going to be doing that today in a little bit of a different format than what we've done in the past. So we're trying to get a little bit more targeted, a little bit more regional than what you've seen in the past. But before we do that, I will just turn it over to Tom, who is going to do some context setting, some stage setting, because this presentation is supposed to inform the transformative youth justice hubs.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Yeah, so as we talked about a little bit earlier, as you're kind of seeing this presentation from Emily, just have in the back of your mind that we're trying to set the parameters for those transformative youth justice hubs. Some of the main elements that were included originally, $4 million to create 4 hubs. 2 urban and 2 rural. Bringing operators partnerships to coordinate and provide support to youth and families for prevention and reentry points. They'll have a lead fiscal partner and coordinating partner, and then there will be a board that is run by co-chairs with different backgrounds. Partnerships will include prevention support and services that center youth well-being domains with a specific priority towards adolescent age youth. And it'll be closely connected with the YJI, which will provide support to the Life Back Center. So as Emily is kind of going through her slides, just keep that in mind, because at the end of the conversation, we'll come back. And like I mentioned, we have some specific questions that we just want to narrow down things on the parameters as we develop the RFP.
Thank you, Tom. So today's presentation, like I said, is going to look a little bit different than what we've done in the past. Past meetings, we've done this kind of regional, New York City, outside New York City view of the justice system. In this presentation, we're going to be doing a little bit more of a targeted view and looking at 4 select regions and counties that I kind of came up with myself. And so don't read into them too much. And we're going to be taking a look at the youth population and demographics in these areas. We're going to be including some information on socioeconomic indicators for these areas as well. Looking at the juvenile justice system data that we have at DCJS, we're going to be looking at some difference in the system trends, looking at types of cases, looking at kind of some volumes and some rates of cases. We're going to be highlighting places where we see a lot of difference in local practice, even when counties are right next door, for example, looking at differences in adjustment, what's happening to these children, just kind of depending on where they're living. And then of course looking at differences in outcomes by race as well, which is something that we always try to include in our JAC presentations. So starting with the demographics and socioeconomic factors, these are the 4 regions I selected them myself. I really did not get any input from OYJ. They said just choose places that you think look interesting. So I thought that these 4 places appear to be pretty diverse in terms of New York State. So we have New York City, which is of course highly dense, urban, very urban area. Long Island, which I think of as kind of this sprawling suburban area, also has a large population. We have Erie County, which is out in western New York, has a very, has a mix of urban, very urban Buffalo, suburban, Buffalo, and then especially, and I have to admit, I have not been to Buffalo or Erie County, but just when I was looking at some maps, I could see that it's very rural, and that I think in the south it's very rural of the county. And then the southern tier. So the southern tier comprises of 8 counties along the New York border with Pennsylvania. And it has some urban centers. It has Binghamton, it has Elmira, there's Ithaca, which Cornell is there. But for the most part, the southern tier is a very rural part of the country. So not countries, part of the state. So those are the 4 areas. Looking here on our bar charts, we have the information here by race, and I definitely noted Heather's comment about Native American not being on there. So just know that I've heard that. But just looking at New York City, you see the population is the most diverse out of these 4 areas. On Long Island, it has a pretty significant Hispanic population. However, over half of the children there are reported as white, and this is census data. We have Erie County, which is over 66, almost 2/3 white, 10% Hispanic, smaller Hispanic population, about 18% Black. And then the southern tier, which is predominantly white, 84% white, and it has smaller Black and Hispanic population. So just looking at, depending on where you live, the demographics are going to look very different, and depending on where these hubs are, the demographics can look very different as well. So we're also going to be sharing some maps today, and this slide is, don't look too hard, it really is just to introduce the topic. But along with the population and demographic data that we thought was important to share for this group, including some socioeconomic indicators as well. And the Area Deprivation Index, also known as the ADI, it was developed by the Center for Health Research Disparities at the University of Wisconsin. And what they do is they calculate a score or an index from Census Bureau data, ranking block groups from how disadvantaged these neighborhoods are to how advantaged they are. Where you see the red shading is the most disadvantaged, the blue shading is the least disadvantaged. And a block group is really as close as what we can get to a neighborhood using the census data. So it's smaller than a zip code. It's not exactly a neighborhood, but geographically and, looking at maps, heat maps like this, it's as close as we can get to a neighborhood. And they use 17 indicators to develop this index. And they're not too much of a surprise here, looking at educational attainment, median income, looking at the unemployment rate, poverty rate, how many single parent households there are, looking at home values and home ownership, among others. So what you are seeing here on the screen is a map of New York, where you see the shading with the dark red is the most disadvantaged areas, and then the blue are the least disadvantaged areas. And just because we are ranking all of these block groups against each other, of course, downstate where there's a lot of big concentration of wealth, it looks much more blue. But since I know that you guys are all dying to see, here's just a zoom in on New York City specifically. But you can see on this map the areas of blue where there's the least disadvantaged based on this index, and then the areas that are the more red, yellow, orange, more disadvantaged. And especially in New York City, you see it in the Bronx, you see it kind of down in Staten Island there, see it in South Brooklyn, over in East Brooklyn, parts of Queens. So just because we do know that there's large concentration of wealth downstate, it certainly doesn't mean that there aren't neighborhoods that there's a lack of resources. So moving on here, we'll start with the southern tier. The southern tier has about 75,000 youth age 7 to 17, 118,000 under age 18. The majority of the population is white, but there are smaller Black and Hispanic populations. in the southern tier. And this is what their map looks like. And you can see some blue areas kind of around Ithaca, Binghamton, Elmira, Corning, which I don't know what makes Corning different than everyone else kind of around it. Glass. Yes, I know, Corning there, right? So, and then over in Delaware County, kind of all the way over to the east over there, you see, areas where there's more advantage. But just looking at this, the first thing we really see is that there really is kind of a lot of red. And it's also a large geographic area, right? So this is 6,200 square miles. It's a large geographic area. And when we think about these transformative youth justice hubs and where they are going to exist in the rural areas, what does that mean? Like what's their reach going to be? How far are people going to have to drive? I mean, the rural parts of New York, southern tier is typical in that there is a lot of population, there's very little population density over a very large area. So thinking about impact, thinking about, who, where, how is this going to look based on the population that lives there. So moving on to Erie County. So we have Erie County has about 118,000 children 7 to 17, 190,000 under age 18, 18% Black, 10% Hispanic, 64% white. Here's what the map of Erie County looks like. And you can see there's a lot of areas of disadvantage around Buffalo, especially in the urban center, but as well, yes.
I'm just gonna point out that the red on the bottom, like that Collins, that's the exact outline of the cover.
Oh, that's fascinating. So that is probably the block group for that area. So that's yeah. Good. I'm glad that you have looked at the map and said, and I did my cutting correctly, because that was one of my my worries. I'm like, I hope I did it right. But you can see there's areas of blue around suburban Buffalo, down under in the southern part of the county, just where there's places where people obviously are less resourced. Erie County is also 1,200 square miles. So it's a large area. Next, we'll move over, come back east over to Long Island. Long Island has about 600,000 children under age 18 total, 388,000 age 7 to 17. A significant Hispanic population on Long Island, about a quarter, over half of the children are white, and then about 10 or 11% Hispanic. And then this is what Long Island looks like. And then the northwestern side of the island, you can see there's a lot of blue, same thing out in the Hamptons, and the southeastern side of the island. In the middle of Long Island, though, you see more neighborhoods where people are under-resourced. Again, it's a large area, 2,800 square miles. And then New York City, we've already seen this map, but New York City has a very large youth population, very dense. 1 million children, 7 to 17, that are kind of what we think of in that adolescent age range, but 1.7 million total under age 18. The most diverse population that we've seen of these 4 areas here, where about a quarter the children are Black, about a quarter are white, and 35% Hispanic, and then 15% are other, who are, and I did look at that, it is predominantly Asian, but not all Asian for sure. And then here's the map, where we have the different neighborhoods and just how they show up on the heat map. So those are the 4 areas that we're going to be looking at. I put some other census indicators on here, just what I thought would be interesting to look at. The percent of children in poverty the last 12 months, percent of children living in a household receiving public assistance, children living with one parent. I thought public school enrollment was interesting just because there was such a big difference in New York City compared to everywhere else. But if you look at the first three, the percent of children in poverty the last 12 months, percent of children living in a household receiving public assistance, percent of children living with one parent. New York, what I thought was interesting is that New York City, Erie County, Southern Tier, the numbers are different, but they're kind of within range. But Long Island looks significantly better off. But it's not to say, when we look at those maps, we can definitely see not everyone is better off, right? There's still neighborhoods where there are people who are under-resourced and where, and could be helped by the money that you guys allocate. So we'll move on to our juvenile justice system data that we have at DCJS. And here, just to go over our justice system high level here, we use probation intakes a lot as an indicator for how many children are in the system, what the prevalence of children are in the system. It's one of the best data points that we have. And so the majority of children are going to be kind of, if they are arrested, they're going to find themselves at probation for an intake, a very large proportion of them. And then at probation, the case could either be adjusted or diverted, or the case could go to family court and there could be a petition filed. If there's a petition filed, there could be a JD finding, and then there's the case could result in placement, probation, or conditional discharge. So there could also be no finding or a dismissal in family court. So one of the goals of the Youth Justice Hubs, just reading through the proposals, is to establish a relationship with law enforcement agencies in the court system to support diversion services. So I'm going to focus a lot on adjustment diversion because that's where we have the best data, but we'll also be including some other information as well. We'll look at some volumes and rates of cases at probation. We'll look at some family court data as well. So taking a look at what probation intakes have looked like over the last 5 years, here's our three of our areas. We have Southern Tier, Erie County, and Long Island. Just looking at these three areas, they've all seen a similar trend in that probation intakes, which was, like I said, an indicator that we use for how many children are going into the system, kind of came down during COVID and then they come back up. So whereas in Southern Tier and Erie County, they've come up to be kind of similar to where they were prior to the pandemic. You can see Long Island, they're up a lot more, right? And I don't know the math exactly off the top of my head, but that's a 30 to 40% increase compared to prior to the pandemic. Another thing that we see, just looking regionally here, is about a third of the cases are for felonies, and about 2/3 of those cases are for misdemeanors. So, and that's kind of similar to what we see in a lot of other places outside New York City, about a third felony, about 2/3 misdemeanors. And then looking at their rates, so just so we can kind of compare across these different geographic locations based on the population who's living there, looking at the rate of intake per 10,000 population. So the Southern Tier had the highest intake rate, 150 intakes per 10,000 children, followed by Erie County, which had 96 intakes per 10,000 population, and then Long Island, which had the lowest rate at 52. So definitely some differences here. Another thing that I thought was interesting was that Erie County and Southern Tier kind of have similar numbers of intakes. They're kind of like around 600 the last couple of years. But remember, Southern Tier is over 6,200 square miles and is 8 counties. And that's how many comprise about 600 intakes a year. And then Erie County, they're 1 county. So just something to note. Long Island, I wanted to put Long Island here on just to show New York City on the same kind of scale, just so we could see how much New York City really towers over Long Island. So with New York City, they have a fairly high intake rate, 130 intakes per 10,000 population. So just second to the southern tier, which we saw was 150. Another thing about New York City that's a little different than what we saw with the other 3 regions is that a higher percentage of the cases that they're seeing are for felonies. So you have about 2/3 of the cases are for felonies, and then about 1/3 of the cases are for misdemeanors. So it's definitely a lot different than what we were seeing in the other regions and other counties that we were looking at. So next, we'll just go into look at some of these probation intakes, volume and rate, by race and ethnicity. So this is the southern tier, looking at probation intake for the last 5 years. And you can see that the white children have the highest number of probation intakes, followed by the Black children, followed by Hispanic children. However, the Black children in the southern tier have the highest rate of probation intake. So we saw that, while they are 6% of the population, you can use this data to see kind of who's more disproportionately impacted by the system. And this is a really good example of that, just looking at how high that rate
Could
is.
it indicate though that more children are put into placement than go through probation?
I don't know about the placement numbers. But I don't know. About the placement numbers.
Yeah, I'm just curious and that throws it off.
Yeah.
Maybe need enough. I'm sorry, I wondered if, because these are just probation intakes and you see how high the numbers are for white children. I wonder though, if that's because other children other than white children are being put more in placement than put through probation intake.
Well, I mean, some of it would depend on whether it was eligible for, are these intakes or are these actual?
These are intakes.
These are intakes, yeah.
I'm wondering if we give more white children the opportunity to go through probation and
No, this is the adjustment level, right?
Yeah.
Not formal probation.
Yes, correct. So this is that.
Okay.
So no one's been sentenced yet.
Okay.
They're.
The only thing that's doesn't help is pre-detention, right? Where they're
Yeah.
coming in custody.
Mhm.
So it's anybody who went through the adjustment phase at an appearance ticket level.
Yes. Yes, correct. So, so this is what the southern tier looks like. Looking at Erie County, you'll see that the Black children have the highest number and the highest rate of probation intake. The white children have second highest number, and then the Hispanic children have the lowest number, however, they have the second highest rate. So just seeing how different populations, if we look at the data by race, ethnicity, who's impacted by the system, what are the disparities, that we're trying to target here.
And like, I just have a question about
Sure.
your data. Do they include the intakes include the kids that have to go straight to petition anyway, or are these just the kids who are eligible and suitable for diversion?
They include both. So both kids that are eligible and suitable to be adjusted, as well as those that aren't, and they just go straight to family court. They don't go through the adjustment.
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to say what's really interesting to me about this, to the point that was made, at the beginning of the commissioner, is that, if we remember, there were only 3 months in 2019 where the 17-year-olds actually joined the party, right? And then COVID hit 5 months into the full implementation of raising the age. So we're still below where we were, right? That's the story that people are missing, is that we're still below where we were pre-COVID.
And that might differ depending on where you are, which is probably an important, a lot of times when we talk about the data, we tend to like bifurcate and be like New York City, not New York City, but there's a lot of unique places, in New York City and outside New York City. So it's a good point, and it could vary.
Yeah, I just think we have to keep our eyes on the 2019.
Yeah, it's definitely a reference year.
Because the 17-year-olds came.
Right.
And they are a much higher, spending and crew than even the 16-year-old.
Yeah, and then in 2020, the pandemic hit, which just kind of
Yeah.
inflated everything, right?
2021,
Yeah.
nobody was doing anything.
Yeah.
So this is just really interesting.
So just taking a look here at Long Island, you'll see here as well, the Black children have the highest volume and the highest rate of probation intake. And again, we're using probation intake as our measurement for children going into the system. And with Long Island, especially the Black and Hispanic children, those intakes have come up quite a bit since 2021, and they've come up more than the white children. You can see those lines, the orange and the gray lines are a little steeper than the blue line, but Long Island had a lower rate of probation intake compared to some of these other places that we were looking at. And then in New York City, you know, the first thing we always mention in New York City is that there's just very few white children in the system. It's predominantly a system of Black and Hispanic children. And the Black children have the highest rate, followed by Hispanic. And so it's hard to make comparisons with, just because we have such small numbers of white children in the system. But you see that those intakes really came down and went back up in 2023. So the next thing we'll take a look at are probation adjustment trends. So this is the conversation that just had about, you know, what we were looking at. We're kind of looking at everyone who's going into probation. And now we're going to say, okay, who's being diverted at probation? What does diversion look like? And because that's, I think, always one of the goals is to divert children earlier on when in the system when you can. So these are probation adjustment rates for Long Island, Erie County, Southern Tier, New York City. And so this is how many of cases could be adjusted or could be diverted from the system, and it just kind of goes away. It doesn't go to family court. And you can see there's big differences between these regions. So Long Island, you have over half of the cases are being diverted. Erie County, you have about half. That number comes down quite a bit in the Southern Tier. In 2023, you'll see it's 32%. In New York City, it was at 24%. In New York City, we also saw a pretty, substantial, a 10-point decrease there between 2022 and 2023 in cases being diverted at adjustment. So depending on where these hubs are and who they're working with in their work with the justice system, there's going to be differences in practice. This is probably attributed to many things. I don't have exactly what it's I don't have, the mathematics on what it's attributed to, but, it could be attributed to types of cases. It could be attributed to practice, but just differences between the local governments and how they're operating, what their policies are at the local level. And that's just probation. This is probably true of police departments as well, have different policies, different practices, how they handle youth arrests. And even within the regions, you can see that adjustment can vary widely depending on where you are. So looking at these bar charts here, we have the total Southern Tier over here on the left-hand side of the screen, and then Southern Tier for 2023 by county over on the right-hand side of the screen. And just take for example, Chemung and Steuben counties. So they have kind of similar numbers of intakes closed, 100, 120 intakes closed, but they have very different adjustment rates. So you have Chemung is adjusting 33% of their cases, where Steuben is adjusting 58% of their cases. Also just looking at the numbers of children in the system in these counties, Shenango had 22 cases closed total in 2023. Tioga, 14 cases. Schuyler, 67% adjustment rate, but they only had 6 cases. So I think, thinking about where these hubs are, and I think my key takeaway and my points are with these slides is that there's going to be a lot of variation between the counties. if they're, and I know that the hubs aren't necessarily like a county unit of analysis, right? They are going to, they could span across county lines, right? But there's gonna be differences in the way practice is happening. Same thing on Long Island. This one always like makes my eyes blow up a little bit when I look at it, but you'll see on Long Island, when we think about Long Island, it's like, oh, Long Island, and it's this one place, and we kind of lump Nassau and Suffolk together a lot in our thinking, but there are two counties there, and their adjustment rates look very, very different. We have Nassau County is adjusting 70% of their cases, where Suffolk County is adjusting 27% of their cases last year. So just big differences, and that's with, even with Nassau County having twice as many cases as Suffolk. So big differences in how cases are handled. If I was a child, I would want to go to probation in Nassau County, so I think that my case would be more likely to go away, right? But nothing against Suffolk County right here. So, just to move back to our, looking at our juvenile justice system points, we've looked at adjustment, but diversion in the system can happen at different places. It can happen at the police level. It can also happen at the court level. And my agency, we don't have great data on where diversion is happening for children at besides probation adjustment. But when it comes to family court, what's happening in family court, we do have some kind of indication, a little bit of a proxy, but I use that term like very loosely. A little bit of an indication when diversion might be happening at the court level rather than probation. And that is when we take a look, and you'll have to bear with me here. We take a look at the number of children who are referred from probation to family court. We see what that number looks like, and then we say, okay, how many actually showed up, right? And look at the differences there. So this lovely graphic here, it shows for our 4 regions, the left-hand side of the bar are the number of intakes that are referred to petition, saying, okay, we're not going to adjust this case, where we are referring to the family court, to the presentment agency. They're going to make it a determination on if there's a petition filed. And then over here on the right-hand side is the number of petitions. And so with Southern Tier, Erie County, Long Island, it's kind of hard to tell. I can't really make any definitive judgments about what they're doing because the numbers are kind of close to each other. We wouldn't expect them to be the same for a variety of reasons. But in New York City, I mean, you can't look at this and say that all the children who are being referred are also showing up a petition. You know, we have 5,600 children referred for the presentment agency. There's 1,400 petitions. And I think we know anecdotally that there's diversion programs happening at the court level in New York City. And so my kind of key takeaway here is that, again, the hubs are going to be dealing with systems that are operating differently. And New York City might be, they may not be the only one who is diverting at the court system. Yes, Gisa.
Just a reminder too, this is the JJPs, right? And if we're staying true to the other age groups that fall within the purview of the JJ, we have another set of population that are going through the CJ system.
Yes.
Right? So if the focus is adolescents, that is one thing. If the focus is younger adult, emerging adult, it's another thing.
Right, if they're.
Exactly, and then, they grow into the other system, as we know that, unfortunately.
How do we have more positions than referrals in Erie County?
I've wondered that. I don't know if they are sending, like, because I know from youth part, this is a theory I have, and I don't have a definitive answer on it, but we did have a theory that from youth part, they were sending more straight to petition, or they were using the wrong code. So, okay. But,
Right, so rather than going back to, through the diversion process when it gets removed down.
yeah, and from youth part, you know, for the 16 and 17-year-olds who are in youth part and they get removed, the majority of them do get removed. Most of them are going to probation, but judges do have the option to send straight to family court. So, but it's something that we could look into more for, and I know there's probably interested people, we are interested in this too.
And I also wanted to, I mean, that would also accommodate the pre-petition, the cases coming directly on the pre-petition that don't go through the adjustment process, so that.
These petitions?
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
That's what I'm.
Yes, okay, so probably the second one's probably true, that there's they just have a higher straight to petition, less to adjustment. But they actually do have more, most of their cases do go to adjustment as well. I don't wanna. Yeah. Okay, so just moving on here, we'll look at probation adjustment by race and ethnicity for our 4 areas. And, you know, what we see kind of everywhere across the board is that Black and Hispanic youth are less likely to be diverted from the system. They're less likely at adjustment to have their cases diverted. And you can see, and I put these little red hats on my bars here, that consistently the Black and Hispanic youth are beneath the white in terms of their adjustment rates, kind of across the board for every region. And then we'll just kind of wrap up here by looking at some family court data and looking at family court petitions and outcomes. So one thing, and this has been a theme of mine, I guess, throughout this presentation, is that we're going to see differences in terms of severity of charges depending on where you are. So in the southern tier, you have between 40 and 50% of the cases are for felonies, but in Erie County, it's more like 50 to 60% of the cases are felonies. And looking at New York City and Long Island, this graphic here, the dark is the felony, the lighter gray is the misdemeanor. You'll see in New York City, you have over 80, last 3 years, over 80% of the cases have been for felonies. So very different than what we saw in the rest of the state. And then on Long Island, about 50 to 60 around there % of the cases are felonies. So severity of charges definitely going to differ depending on where you are. This is something I want to spend just a minute on looking at outcomes in family court. So what happens to a youth when they have a juvenile delinquency petition filed? How many are receiving the JD finding, which is the equivalent of the conviction, but in the youth justice system, there was found that there was a crime. And then how many don't have a finding? So the blue portions of these bars, the dark blue is the placement, and then the lighter blue is the conditional discharge, is probation, and then the lightest blue is conditional discharge. So you can see kind of across the board, the percentage of children in 2023 who are getting the JD finding, it's pretty much less than half, except for Long Island, which is 51%. But so these children have made it all the way through probation. Their case wasn't diverted at probation. It came to petition. Whatever diversion programs are happening in family court, there was a petition, and there was only 46%, 43% of these cases resulted in a finding. So could there be opportunity to divert them earlier on in the system if they're kind of getting all the way through and then just, getting a no finding anyways? So opportunities for adjustment. I think that's just a big opportunity out there for diversion.
Yeah, I just feel like this has been a persistent trend for years, right? And we've had a lot of questions about, just think about work calendaring and the amount of stress on the family and the kid to go through the entire process for no finding. right? I mean, a conditional discharge or an ACOD is one thing, but there's a whole bunch of no spelling. How can we help that agencies in particular, right? Identify those cases that are going to fall apart. Like that is just a huge mystery to me. It's an unbelievable waste of resources and people, emotional.
I would want more information because I know just anecdotally what happens is one kid might have 5 cases. We might make a finding on one, and maybe put them on probation and ACD for them. So, but I would need to know how many youth that represents as opposed to cases, because that is a consistent way that we see them.
Yeah. But think that wouldn't have a no finding.
Yes, it would, because we would take an admission on one case, and we would put them on probation or whatever we're gonna do, and then we would pre-fact finding ACD all 4 of the others. Cooperate with the disposition number 1. Because it's now, we don't need findings on all these cases to get them the services and help that they need. So that is routinely how we handle those.
So that's really good context.
So I don't know what other counties are doing. I don't know if they have so many cases per individual kid. I don't know. I just know how I see these cases. And I look at it as one case, one kid, but there's really multiple ones.
That's really good to. Good mind.
So I don't know. So we're not going to send 4 to adjustment.
Right.
We're going to package them together.
All right, so just moving on here, I have a few more slides looking at the outcomes by race and ethnicity. So these bars here look at just over the last 5 years, how many children by race and ethnicity are getting a JD finding. And I think this was one of our key takeaways at the retreat last October was that in terms of just differences in outcomes by race, we saw more of them at adjustment than at family court, where when we were looking kind of, at differences, in family court, we weren't seeing too many differences between race and ethnicity in terms of how many are getting a JD finding, how many are getting an ACD. But so in New York City, of course, the number of children who are white is very small. It's hard to make conclusions about that number when you're comparing to the rest of the population. But we do see differences across regions. So Long Island tends to have more findings, higher percentage of their cases result in findings. New York City has than New York City, just compared to New York City. And then in Erie County in the southern tier, in terms of Erie County, looking at the Hispanic populations in southern tier and Erie County are small. So again, it is a little hard to make conclusions about differences that we see, because a few cases can throw those percentages off. But if in Erie County, just comparing the black and the white, you kind of see a similar trend. In the southern tier, you'll see that the white children are more likely to get the JD finding than the black children. And so, but the black children have the lower adjustment rate. So again, opportunity for adjustment. If we can adjust these cases, and they won't get to family court, we would maybe then we would see parity between these JD finding percentages between the black and white children in the southern tier. So just to wrap up here with our key takeaways. So with these transformative youth justice hubs, there's data out there on demographics, socioeconomics, geographic considerations. There's information that can be known about where the hub is serving. We saw a lot of that today. We know that the demographic makeup is going to look really different across the state. We're going to have some rural areas with really small populations that cover thousands of miles. How are we going to make an impact in those areas? There's counties like Erie that have children in both the urban and rural areas and suburban areas. So how can the hub help those types of counties that kind of have a very good mix of urban and rural? We know that there's a lack of resources regardless of if you live in an urban or rural area. There's levels of deprivation, they vary across the state. And then just our justice system considerations. So the practices that people are gonna run into at the local level, they're gonna look really different, even when those counties are right next door. We saw the difference between Nassau and Suffolk. We may have diversion happening at different points in the system, so working with entities, local government to increase diversion, there may be just practices already in place where you may see it's low at adjustment, but maybe it's high at family court. And then we saw that there was racial disparities in both the urban and rural counties, just going back to the southern tier where the Black and Hispanic were only 6% of the population each, but they had much higher rates of intake into the system. There's all my data sources for people who are interested and willing to answer any questions.
Thank you, Emily, for setting the stage. Actually, a lot of people thought if we switch gears, well, not switch gears, but actually apply this data knowledge to other data hubs. And giving us points of reference around what it would be hard to find other. And what are there target areas, not regions, but areas meaning of the JJ system that we want a particular these hubs. So we're gonna dive into this part of the conversation.
Thanks, Betty. So I know we have about 25 minutes left. We have some information to cover as far as the numbers go. I'm going to start off real quick by talking about a conversation that we had with the Chicago Restorative Justice Hubs, and teams that are interested, feel free to chime in. We were all involved together with them. They were very, very helpful to us. But in short summary, what they since they have 6 community-based hubs in the Chicago area. So it's a smaller geographic area. Support and coordination is run by Adler University. So, we're looking at support from the Liveback Center out of the YJI, the University of Albany. Similar structure there. They're guided by 5 key pillars, which is something we're going to want to think about. Radical hospitality, accompaniment, engagement, system, and stakeholders, learning community, and building relationships. And one of the biggest things that I took away from this whole thing is it's really intentionally advocating on behalf of the youth and families as far as navigating the system, right? So kind of walking with them to potential service areas that they need to deal with, because it's overwhelming. They're trying to navigate it on their own. So that's a big kind of there's not really a formal process that they use to be a hub there. They also, to bring all of their hubs together, they have a leadership circle once a month, where they're bringing together the executive directors of the various organizations that are involved. So they're learning from each other. They are sharing best practices and how to implement. They're hyper local. They respond to the needs of the local communities. The system doesn't dictate what they do. They kind of figure it out at that local level. Wellness ambassadors, and then they do case notes. They do mentoring sessions, do surveys, reduction to risk factors, things like that. So just a high level snapshot of what we've done hour-long conversation with those folks, and they, you know, they indicated that they'd share with us, you know, some of the documentation that they used when they are starting off, so that could be a really good, you know, it's good groundwork for, how we start shaping out the language of the RFP. Geez, or Tristan, anything else you want to add before we move into some of the questions that we want to answer?
First of all, I want to say thank you, Tom, for leading this effort and getting in touch with the 4 different hubs and making sure that we actually had a meeting and had an opportunity to talk to them. I think that's critical. A couple of things. They started in 2011. That was super surprising to me. So this is not like a new thing that we would be trying out. It's being proven as a concept elsewhere. Right, in Chicago, different space. So I thought that was encouraging. And the other thing that I thought was really cool was that they had a data person also built into that support, which is similar and hopefully would provide us with models of what to do and not to do with respect to the YPACs. We're talking about the hubs, but the YPACs are built, right? So that was interesting. And the third thing I thought was really fascinating was the generosity that they demonstrated and offered in sharing with us what they've done, what they already have, right? We asked if we write an RFP, how do we write it such that it's successful and valuable? And they straight out said, we have things already that we can use and tweak. So I feel like it's an older idea that's been proven, that's a takeaway. 2, somebody already invented this wheel, so it can serve as an inspiration, right? And third, this data piece is really built in the same way that the JJAG arrived at it, so that is validating. Those are the 3 points that I looked at.
Thank you. Tristan, anything?
Yeah, I would echo some of the things that you said. I think the one take, like, I would take their very specific emphasis on restorative justice and spin that a little bit to what the JAG will type in. I do think it's very interesting that they had the leaders from the organizations. They used already established organizations and their communities too, which was really cool and important to see. Like, they weren't creating a new organization. They used organizations that were already established. I think it's like the intent here as well. And then the other thing that, like, I'm curious to know is they don't like provide funding to the hubs, right? The hubs have like leaders, what were they called? You mentioned that here, the councils,
The ambassadors.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
The leadership circle, and then they may come together and advocate with something that they want to fund, and then they get funding for that specific.
Right. Yeah, so that was the way to bring in the grading concept.
Yeah.
That we've been talking about before as well. They actually were very excited.
They were, yeah.
That we were able to, you know, say that we're going to start this with a decent level of funding, get it up and off the ground, and then we can figure out hopefully how to replicate it from here. So really, so we just wanted to give that quick background, and then there are some very specific questions that, as we've been kind of thinking through, what we include in the RFP, like to have this group kind of think about, give some answers to, and Emily alluded to the first one, which is really like the geographic area, right? So, I mean, there's a way to use the index potentially that Emily showed us earlier in the presentation, or maybe it's a city level, it's a county level, side, on the rural side, is it, do we do a county, do we do multiple counties? If we do multiple counties, do they have to be contiguous or are they like-minded? So those are just a few of the questions we would like to answer in terms of geography. For any presentations onto that. And we'll get into the discussion more, but I just want to kind of go through some of the other ones, so which side of them. The funding amount, we did $4 million. We would recommend that we say we anticipate awards to be approximately $1 million because we're thinking about, well, what if somebody comes in at 1.2 million, and somebody else comes in at 800,000, right? We don't want to necessarily say that, well, we don't go above $1 million, but we obviously need to stay within that $4 million pot of money. On the scoring aspect, what factors are most important? Is it most important that we see areas that have a proven collaborative? Is it the ability to collect and disseminate data or have a data partner? Demonstrated support from key system players? Is it more important sustainability plan? So some of those things, we just kind of want to narrow down on what those most important factors are as we're kind of scoring. Eligibility, we are recommending that we leave it to community-based organizations or institutions of higher education. I think we had a conversation a little earlier. The difficulty it is to work with county governments because of the time delays, accepting funding, going through legislature, all those sorts of things. Although they could be partners of collaborative, right? And then the other pieces, position of the collaboratives, what various disciplines does everybody want to see in there, and how do we incorporate equity in all aspects of what we're doing. So that's a high level overview. I'll kind of go to the question first. See about that.
It kind of struck me when you were talking about Chicago that they have 6. And you use the word hyper local to describe them. So it's just something that I was thinking, are we wanting to do something similar, or we pilot it in a hyper local way, see if it's successful, and then maybe do more? Or do we want to set it up so that it's supposed to serve a really broad area and then perhaps it may not be an effective?
And then they differ between rural and urban.
Yeah.
Right, so they're in Chicago, so it might be easier to kind of do that in a small geographic area. Maybe somehow using the area deprivation index to some degree.
Sorry, something just struck me in remembering the conversation with Chicago is that each of the hubs also has specific specialties, right? Like some are very specific on organizing, right? Because they did some work around organizing to get legislative change, and some are very specific on other things. So that I think also can play a part in that Chicago model being a little bit different, and that they work together and built upon their strengths, but each of the hubs has a little bit different specialties.
Yeah, and maybe honestly, maybe there's, the hub is sort of that central location within a city. And then they have various organizations that might mirror what Chicago is calling their hubs, right? So maybe it's kind of a sub hub or something like that.
So I'm thinking about what we just saw and also the earlier conversation, is there a specific outcome that are we looking for a decrease in initial arrest? So we're looking for an increase in diversion. Like what's the thing that we are asking, geez, what's the problem that we're asking, or the strength we are asking them to support? Because to me, I would want to go to the data. Where are we seeing whatever that X is?
I think part of what we outlined. Defining conversations, there were elements around prevention, and it was a very particular part of the data system that we wanted. It was diversion. I think it was in that area. Yeah, I think that's where we specifically, and that may give us a look thinking about the data shared, I think there's touch points that's giving us, it's, for me, what I saw was it justified that thinking that we have. You know, exactly, yeah. And, you know, and on the prevention side of it, it's still, you know, I'm still kind of in my head trying to figure out like what's the right touch point of data that gives us that, right? Because there is, you know, I appreciate the ADI index, you know, in terms of what it's sort of some positives of density to which you have outcomes that are concerned. Just adults having mobility, right? But it's not determinism, right? It's like simply because you grew up in a single parent household. You know, right? It could also be the nature of there just isn't a good density of prevention work that's existing or grading of prevention work that's existing. And so I'm thinking back to our regional, you know, work that we had done in terms of those attending. Right, exactly. You know, in terms of well, how well, just looking at how well did they, the intention was for them to be a better creative sort of connective tissue to create better prevention opportunities. That, so I'm wondering if there are learnings from that that tells us like actually they weren't able to be successful to create that kind of prevention arena. That can also help us isolate what regions of the state.
So going back to that point, that was along my line of questioning as well, like what are we focusing on? And I feel like now that you have the 2 points that'll help you geographically, because you want to place the hubs where it's closer to resources that are able to provide the work that you guys are doing. So it can be in the Bronx, like South Bronx, for example, but it's so accessible to people in Queens or because that hub is providing the specific services that affects that area. So it'll make it a little bit easier for you guys to figure out where the hub should be, but also like finding the CEOs and other resources in the community that can connect with people well as well, because you could have ICEOs that are providing X, Y, and Z, but if people don't feel connected or they don't feel comfortable or they don't even like know that they exist, then it's kind of pointless to have them there to be providing the services if people don't feel like it's something that'll benefit them. So that all ties together to say that like, I guess doing the work along with finding locations and such and figuring out the location is like actually hearing from the people in the community really helps, so where they can provide insight on like, okay, in order for me to have preventive services, this is what I need from data or to be at. Like I need maybe housing support or food support or school support, like whatever it may be, like you have to have the people who are able to provide that at the hubs for the people that are doing support for support.
I also want to say, you know, I'm trying to be mindful of the time that we have. We're not going to cut this conversation short. What we're going to do is we're going to shift it to a survey platform, send you all these questions so you all can digest it even more, you know, and give more direct feedback. Because there's, we definitely want to know this stuff as this RFP is kind of useful.
And I had a question for the survey. The question is, imagine 5 years from now, what's the headline of the house that we want to see? Maybe that will help us focus on what is the success of the house as defined by the JJ. And then think a little bit about the values too, right? Like, as we define the RFP, are we looking to piggyback on CPOs that are already established and strong and that can take us to the next level and turn a hub into hub and spokes? Or are we looking at making an investment in smaller organizations that did not have a thought yet? And that there would be a huge infusion of funding that would also come with a lot of handholding needs and support needs. Who's prepared to get that? So I think adding these 2 questions, I get to you.
Something important to remember there is this will be a reimbursement based contract. So
That too.
it's just something to keep in mind, like, you obviously don't limit the ability of someone that is not well established coming in, because
Yeah.
they will have to at least front it on the cap.
It's $1 million over how many years?
3 years. It was basically based on a one-year strategic plan.
It's the front-end part,
Yeah.
Most of the money is.
We're gonna have to raise the water before, so, we, and 30. So then that kind of limits location time, because specific locations throughout New York State that are supposed to be helping people that need services. 9 times out of 10, the surrounding areas don't really have what they need. That's the problem now. So it's probably gonna have to be on a larger scale where you're facing of order for services to be provided.
You know, I would say not to dive into the conversation anymore, right? But there's also ways that we can pass through money to small organizations, right? To be able to help out those smaller organizations that might have, in fact, what you're saying, it might have a better relationship with it, really, it's people that you're looking for, the services that they need. So it's just not the small organizations that don't have those relationships, you know. So we might want to think about that too, because that can be written through the language. There's a certain amount of time for the smaller organization and find a way to give them the money that they need. But
I think one thing I would just add to that, generally, when you're thinking about what you're putting in an RFA, I think it's always good to keep in mind, anything that you prescribe limits what comes back.
Yeah.
So every single thing you're thinking of including as a requirement, because we can say things at the front as value, things we value, things that matter, things we want to do, so that you kind of encourage applicants to think about that and submit it. But the more you prescribe and the more you require, the less innovative those applicants can be in terms of coming back with things that we're not currently imagining. So it's really difficult to strike that balance, and truthfully, every single RFA or RFP that you put out there, you learn and you do something different next time, but just every single thing that we put in require could limit, because we could require, for example, if it's an entity has to have capacity, we could require where the service locations generally be, like, that is something you could do, so, but it's, then you also limit things that we might not know about those specific localities. We're not also experts in where things should be in any specific community, so it's like it can work or not, too, just.
I'll say it.
And so I know I'm not checking, but one of the things that struck me was when you said, when we were talking about how the different specialties, and the media is one help that feeds in, mentioning when planning on this table or bringing a customer up to do, it might be interesting, right? If that were that model, is the established orgs would have to be that main hub, and then the feeder orgs, whatever that would look like, could be your smaller organizations that are closer to the community. That gives that some stuff that Precious is talking about. And if you use, I know that we arbitrarily pick these areas, but they make sense. If you decide, hey, this makes sense, let's start, to Diane's point, let's pilot it. See if it makes sense. Or it might be interesting to get at what everybody is like, it's not, it might be interesting for all.
It seems like this is a good start in terms of providing feedback, to the development of our case. And, we'll put together a survey and send it out to you all, so they're just going to get more thoughts around this stuff, because this is definitely, as it's laid out, the intention is for these hubs to be at for staff, be able to see them July.
Yeah, our hope is to finalize the RFP by the end of the year. Get it out on the street sometime in January, so that we can get responses, score them, choose them, develop contracts, you know, it's a lot of process that happen. So it's a goal date would be July 1. Hopefully. Start.
I'm just curious, when you talked to Chicago, what was their relationship with the local? Did they involve?
They didn't even mention, it was really like, the ideas were all crowdsourced at the CBO level.
But as far as the system, and the structure there, you know, they had this relationship building aspect to it where ambassadors that try to develop relationships with the schools. With whatever aspect, is kind of encountering along the way, so that they're kind of helping a fellow community member in navigating the system and getting what they need.
And it sounds like so part of also recognizing these are hubs that are at a much later maturity.
Yeah.
Right, and you know, sometimes it's even maybe useful to hear like, what was it like the first 3 years?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, because, you know, that's. All right.
I just want to do one thing, like, when I think of the hubs, what I would like to say is, you know, that they get all the surrounding counties that they're working, that they're supporting, be consistent in the response. The inconsistent response across your state is really kind of crazy. So consistency, I think, would be really great.
And that's, you know, and that's the system side of it, you know, it's the prevention side, right? That could, what's the stuff that also needs to occur to these different regions that would be. So thank you all. Right, so next meeting, December 11th, is in Albany. I love kid notes. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Right, second, thank you, all in favor. Thank you all, thank you so much.